The war in Ukraine has changed the world. And now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project Reinforce UA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on reinforceua.com.
Доброго дня, я Вячеслав Покатило від бізнес-школи МІМ Київ. Вітаю вас на проєкті Reinforce UA. Це англомовний проєкт, і для тих, хто приєднався до нас вперше і потребує перекладу, прошу натиснути кнопочку Interpretation внизу екрану. Hello, dear colleagues, both in Ukraine and worldwide. I'm Vyacheslav Pokatilo, and on behalf of MIM Kyiv Business School, welcome you on Reinforce UA project. This project was designed in order to inspire Ukrainian business community in this difficult time and to bring ideas of world-renowned intellectuals to share their view about the future. The project was made possible due to the support of Bogdan Havrilshin Family Foundation, 50 Thinkers Organization, and 3 major worldwide business education associations, AACSB, AMBA, and EFMD. We are grateful for all donations you've made registering on the project, and remind that all collected money will be directed to support Ukrainian women, temporarily displaced Ukrainian women who would like to start their own businesses. Before I shall give the floor to our honorable guest today, I'd like to remind you that the project, this today's lecture is recorded, and the video will be available afterwards on this site and on different platforms. We are online, and therefore you will be able to ask questions after the presentations. And for this purpose, I kindly ask you to use a Q&A button rather than a chat. And now I'm honored to welcome Deborah Rowland on our project. Deborah Rowland is a renowned expert in the leadership change, and with a unique combination of experience, insights, and research. Throughout her career, he personally led major changes in a big organization like Shell, Gucci Group, BBC Worldwide, and PepsiCo, when she took significant positions like a group HR and vice president organization management and development. Deborah Rowland's research published widely in academic journals. She is co-author of bestsellers books like Sustaining Change, Leadership That Works, published in 2008, and the latest book, Still Moving, How to Lead Mindful Change, which is based on groundbreaking research she conducted a few years ago. So I hope today's lecture will be very interesting, and give the floor to our guest, Deborah Rowland.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Slava, for that introduction, and thank you also for the invitation for me to come and address this group today and to make this recording, and I'm delighted to be here. Just a few words before I sort of get going on my main messages. I've been in many situations in my career and indeed my life where things have felt out of control, unprecedented, dramatic. I didn't really know what was going to happen next, but I've never, ever been in a situation that you all have been. So I just wanted to start by saluting really the courage, the resilience, and the ingenuity that you've shown as a nation in what you're going through. And I got a business report actually in December that showed back then, I don't know what it's like now, but in December, I think only 3% of companies in the Ukraine had to stop production despite the war. Wow. And only 15% were unable to get goods through the port. So for some reason, you're all leading companies that are surviving and getting through this. So I've come here today as much to learn from you about how to lead in unprecedented change as perhaps the other way around. But here we go. Let me just start sharing my slides. Here we go. So my subject today is emergence and agility. So while I don't know, haven't been exactly in your situation, I have been in situations for sure about how to learn to work with the emergence of something new coming from perhaps a difficult moment. How can reconstruction follow a tricky time? How can order flourish from chaos? So I've got some messages for sure to talk about that, but how you do that, you really have to work from a very special place as a leader. Hence the title of my last book, Still Moving, and my company is now also called Still Moving. So at one level, still is an adjective, so it's sustaining, we're still moving. But the real meaning of this book and this phrase is about all movement, the quality of movement, whether you're reconstructing or acquiring a new company. If you're wanting to get to a different place, it begins in stillness. It doesn't start in getting busy and rushing around. So deep movement comes from a still, contemplative, spacious place. Where have I had to do that in my career? Slav has also kindly mentioned that in Pepsi, when I worked for Pepsi, we had to pivot away from a lot of unhealthy food towards much more healthy beverages and food. Certainly when I worked at the BBC, we were facing unprecedented change in the world that was moving to online streaming and more digital consumption. I've worked a lot in the energy sector, and of course the transition there from old fossil fuel to renewables has been an incredible disruptor in the industry. So I have had quite a bit of experience in corporate life with dealing with big change. But how I got into this, I think, why at the cellular level, I love this subject, I've researched it, it's really been with me a long, long time, not just in my corporate life, is that I can share that, in fact, it's the opening sentence in my book, my life began in change. I was adopted as a young child when I was 6 weeks old. And here's a photograph of me, clearly a bit older than 6 weeks old. But at an early stage in life, I was facing a situation of loss of control, something that was perhaps unwanted. I lost all of my coordinates and I had no idea. I was floating in a mother and baby's home for about half a year until I was adopted into the beautiful Rowland family. So I think I've always had a passion for this subject about change, as that's where my life began, really, a big change management experience at the very start of life. So anyway, the three messages I'd like to share today about how the unfolding nature of emergence, and the key word now these days is all about agility, are these three messages. Leading when you have no control. I certainly learned about that at the start of my life. How do you do it when you're leading a system through change where suddenly a lot of the external pressures are coming towards you and have not been planned? So how do you lead when you have no control? The second message is, how do you heal at what I call the system level? And by system, I don't mean systems and like production systems or accounting systems, but the deep field of human consciousness and awareness. And how do you work with upsets, trauma, which any big change brings? And until you can learn how to do that as a leader, there'll always be like a handbrake on agility. You won't move quickly. And then my final message is going to be about your inner state. And I call this message being before doing. So the quality of how you show up as a leader, your quality of your being precedes the quality of how you act. So getting your inner state into a good place, particularly under stress, is vital. And all my research backs that up. So let me start with leading when you have no control. So how do you get through a world where there are many, many more questions than answers? And what I'm going to share with you about how do you lead in situations where it is quite uncontrollable is I am just enamored by the field of what is called complex adaptive systems. which anybody here who studied physics or biology or software programming, so complex adaptive systems, they're complex because there's many, many different parts. They're adaptive because they're having to innovate to changing circumstances. And they are a system because they have one purpose. They are a unified system. So about 20, 25 years ago, I got very into this whole world of living systems, like flocks of birds, how they fly in formation, ant colonies. It's quite incredible how the universe is one big complex adaptive system. And I thought, crikey, I was now in quite senior positions myself at companies like Shell. And I thought, sometimes I have no control over what I'm doing here. How about I saw a business or an organization as a complex adaptive system? How would I lead in that kind of situation? And I started to work with some principles around a flock of birds does not have a CEO bird who guides them in their behavior. So how can we work in a more emergent, adaptive, agile way and adapt to quickly changing circumstances? So there's 3 messages here from complex adaptive systems that I use and have used so much in my business and in all of my change work. And it really frees you up from what I call quite programmatic, top-down, controlled change. I used to do that in the 80s. No longer, this world does not work like that any longer. So the first guidance here is all you can do is have a loose intention. You cannot have a fixed destination. That it's too much of a dynamic set of circumstances. But systems like to have a big why. What is the big why? You can control that. And interestingly, a set of hard rules that govern the micro level behavior of the system that you're working with. It is absolutely fascinating how in the living world, there is a code, a genetic code, that even if you're seeing quite random behavior and chaos, underneath it all, there is a rhythm, there is a set of hard rules that is governing what you see. So complex adaptive systems can innovate when you have a combination of looseness and tight structure, and you have a good balance of both. And I'm just going to show you now a few examples of some hard rules that I've worked with. And once you can get these hard rules established, you can really then have your whole decentralized organization act independently of you. Decision-making can be put down to the levels where it's actually needed. I always show this, the Viking laws, and I know in your situation at the moment, this might trigger certain things, but I found it fascinating, and you can Google Viking laws. But this was a successful trading nation over, three centuries, dispersed all around the world. No central empire. They were agile, they were emergent, and they had these 4 rules that governed their nation. So I just find that quite fascinating, how once you can govern the micro level behavior, you can then empower and have an agile state. We've all been through COVID. Oh my goodness, was COVID the world's big change management teacher? But here's an example. I do a lot of work with the Church of England, and this was a bishop in a very, very large diocese in London. And he thought, I cannot control what's going to happen now, but let's think through what really helps people here. What can we do? How can we guide, again, the micro level behavior? And these were the hard rules that he came up with that I felt are quite pertinent, really, to many situations. When I worked at Shell, this was in the 90s, there was still a lot of prevalence of AIDS and HIV infections. This was in Africa. And we had used a change approach that was very top-down, led from London and The Hague. But it wasn't really changing anything on the ground. So we got a group of people together from the ground. We went to the areas in the business in Africa which were doing things well. We call it positive deviance. So they were deviating from the norm in a positive way. And based on that, these were the 4 hard rules that we then put into the system. So we didn't control anything from any center, but these were the hard rules that governed. And goodness me, did these hard rules make a difference to the situation? Manchester Arena bombing, a big terrorist incident in the UK a few years ago. I worked with the Bishop actually of Manchester, and these were his few hard rules. Again, dynamic situation, uncontrollable, but these really guided through uncertainty. You can guide the how in uncertainty. Even if you can't control the what, you can guide the how. And then finally, just in a more corporate setting, this was a big pharmaceutical company. This was a market that was going for like a rebuild, and they wanted to go for growth. And they were fascinated by this whole notion of hard rules and complex adaptive systems. And they went away from a very, very central top-down governed change program into just having the intention, grow market share bigger than the competition, loose intention, and then these were the hard rules. So a loose intention and then have some hard rules. Now and next, that's the second message about complex adaptive systems. And again, this might be quite an obvious message, but in dynamic situations, you cannot have a long-term plan. You cannot predict exactly what the situation is going to be like in 6 months' time or in 12 months' time. So you give up long-term planning and you just have right now, this is what we need to do. And next, this is what we need to do. Let's just get those two things done. And then we'll stop, see the situation, and then we'll come up with the next plan. So working in a now and next way. This can be quite hard when people are in uncertainty and in ambiguity, because often people want the answers. Well, where will we be in 18 months' time? Good leadership says, well, I don't know. We have got this loose intention. This is what we need to do in the short term and maybe the medium term, but then we'll stop, we'll learn, and we'll adjust. So getting people used to that stepping stone approach to change rather than having a big long-term plan. And then the final thing that I've used from complex adaptive systems, you can't control always the outcomes, but again, you can command the conditions that allow complex adaptive systems to flourish, to innovate, to keep surviving no matter what the situation is. And diversity, connectivity, and rapid feedback loops. Now, as a leader, you can be in command of these three levers that you can pull. So diversity, innovation tends to happen at the edge of a system, not in the center of a system. So getting different ideas, different thoughts together. I mean, even this platform, this forum is a great example of diversity. Connectivity, how do you join up, particularly through lateral networks? So you can't be agile and have emergent change when you have silos and boundaries. And I have to say, I don't know how you view him internally, but certainly on the external stage, how your President Zelensky has connected extraordinarily well outside of your nation into all kinds of avenues is really quite phenomenal. So how are you going to access development partners, the global financial markets when you come through the crisis? Opening up, crossing boundaries is key for complex adaptive systems to thrive. And then rapid feedback loops. So you don't wait for some strategic planning center in the middle to get data from all the business units, and then 6 months later, you hear the results. Complex adaptive systems, they distribute intelligence rapidly through the organization. Again, I think Zelensky is it every evening at 5 or 6 o'clock, there's an address. And I find it quite astonishing how the innovation that you must be learning about through this time, how will that get pulled through into the reconstruction? Because how you've shifted supply chains, where the production facilities are, there must be so much learning. So how is that rich learning being fed back into a bigger system that you can pull through? So when you have no control, these are the three big messages drawn from complex adaptive systems. They're like your guidebook in a sense for leading when you have no control. So I'll just pause there now. That's the first message. How do you lead when you have no direct control of what is happening? So the next big message is this one, healing at the system level. And I've been looking a bit at your previous speakers on this series, and I can imagine that there's been an awful lot of great, amazing advice. I'm curious as to how you've looked at what I call the deep human undercurrents that govern all of collective behavior, healing at the system level. They are a bit like the winds that blow through the universe, the north, south, east. We can feel the impact of winds, but we can't see the wind. So I've studied a lot in the world of systemic inquiry, how to work beneath the level of personality or events and get down beneath. One leader called it, Deborah, you're really good at getting beneath the floorboards. What's really going on here systemically? Don't judge things at the surface level, but really tune in to some deeper truths. And there are certain laws that govern the health of human systems. And they get inflamed when the system is under stress, majorly inflamed. You get like adrenaline pumping through the system. So what needs to be done to attend to these? Because otherwise you won't be able to move forward. You'll stay stuck. And as we know from family system work, what doesn't get addressed gets passed on through the generations. So past upsets have a long shadow if they're not dealt with, if they're not confronted. So I've got 3 messages for how can leaders, what I call, heal at the system level. And I would imagine that this is important for any of the businesses in the Ukraine, but generally they are such powerful pieces of advice that I now work with. And I've worked for about 20 years now. And my research last year into these systemic forces proved that they are, when leaders attend to them, change flows with greater ease, even if it's difficult. Number 1, acknowledge the cost. What is the price to pay for any big change? What has been lost? Who's had to pay the price? And very often in change, leaders tend to overemphasize the benefits. When we get through this, the world will be like this, and don't always address the cost, particularly the cost to the human psyche, not necessarily the cost of, new systems or cost of training, the cost of rebuilding, but the psychological cost. I worked with an organization once in the energy sector, and they were having to decommission a lot of their power plants. And I know that the power plants in Ukraine have really been under attack, and you've been very nimble and agile in how you've worked with that. But this company were moving away, and in fact, they were decommissioning all of their nuclear power plants to move much more into the renewables world. And there just seemed to be something. It was a 150-year-old organization, had a lot of coal mines, lignite mines. And the reconstruction of the energy market and this company's place in the energy market wasn't going quickly enough. And when we delved into it, the reason why was that the leaders who were working in the bits that had to be let go of and decommissioned, their nation's wealth had been built on this energy. And now to know that they were now going to be taken out of the equation came at a huge price to them at the level of the psyche. And once the leaders started to openly talk about the cost of that, change started to flow much more quickly. So it can be quite uncomfortable at times to acknowledge the cost and to look into the pain. But when you do, and I know this in all kinds of aspects of life, the truth sets you free. Once the truth and the disturbance is really acknowledged and looked at, people actually sigh with relief. Thank goodness somebody is talking about it. Whereas when it's not talked about, it actually becomes much worse. And then you get bitterness, you get grievance, and then that can pop up in all kinds of, behaviors that is not always that helpful. So who and what is going to have to pay the price of any change? as well as who and what is going to benefit. So always having that equation of both what I call the prize of change, but also the price. No big change comes without a price tag. So I did a speech 2 weeks ago at it was International Women's Day, and it was a group of both male and women leaders, and their goal was accelerate 50-50, get 50-50 gender representation in their industry. And it's all going to be great when we do that. We'll have better decision making, more diversity, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a mixed audience I was speaking at. And I said, there's nothing in your report that talks about the price of doing that. And I looked at the audience and I said, for example, all you men out there, you'll have less opportunities to get the senior jobs. And there was like this big sort of, oh, she said that. But it led to a real outpouring of, exactly that. Nobody's talked about that. We can see all the gain, but we can't see the price we're going to have to pay. So acknowledging the cost really sets things free. To look with respect. Now, this is a very tough one sometimes. But if you can't look with respect at everything that happens, it'll sort of be with you for the rest of your life. There will be this sort of a residue that won't be comfortable. So how can you acknowledge everything that has happened, that will happen, and in some way give it a sense of purpose, as opposed to if only that hadn't have happened? I know this is a very difficult thing to work with. I had to look with respect at the Irish Catholic Church. The Irish Catholic Church was the reason why I was adopted. But until I could look with respect at the source of the struggle I had in my early life, I couldn't be set free from my story of not being wanted. So it's very important to somehow honor everything. I worked with a company once who had gone through a very, very tricky 3 years of were they going to be sold? They weren't going to be sold. This owner, that owner. And they were so glad when they got through it all. And their CEO was about to give a speech to the top leadership group. And he was going to go up and say, thank goodness that lot up there have now made the decision and we now know what's going to happen. And I said, how about you do something different? How about you go up and say, thank goodness we've had the last 3 years. What have we learned from it? How are we now going to come out of this in a different place? So again, it's a hard truth, but systems can heal when everything is somehow acknowledged with respect. Judgments and complaints weaken systems rather than strengthen systems. And the final message about healing at the system level is every part of the system somehow has to be in its right place. And clearly there is going to be a lot of reconfiguration of territory. The provinces, maybe some of your business units are going to have to be reshaped. If Finland joins NATO, on the border with Russia, what place is that going to bring? It really is a sort of things get broken down and things will be rebuilt in a different way. Going back to this energy company that I worked with, we worked with their top 360 leaders, and every time we met, they had this big map of all the elements in their system, including climate change, Greenpeace, dirty fuel, the board, our investors, our shareholders, all of the different business units. And every time they looked at this, are we all relating to each other in the right way? Is there suitable respect flowing through the system as well? But attending to respectful hierarchy and places, a bit like a children's mobile, when you change one part of it, the rest will start to flutter in a different way. So the actual word remember means to put things back together again. So yeah, I can imagine this is not just about a reorganization or a restructure, but really attending to all of the parts of your system and what interacts with everything else. So healing at the system level. Systemic truths. So my final message is about you personally. So leading when you have no control is more about your overall approach to change. Healing at the system level is looking at the collective psyche and how you work with that deeply and respectfully and truthfully. But it all starts from your quality of being. So last 2 rounds of research I've done in the last 6 years, and that was what got published in the last book. And I was flown to LA, the Academy of Management. For the first time ever, I'd done some research that correlated the relationship between how a leader works with their inner mind state, not just their mind state, but their emotional state, and collective change outcomes. So when the leader is calm, in the right place, everything flows. It really starts with your inward journey, not with trying to change what's outside you, but working on the inside of you. And there's 2 real states of being, if you're just looking at it from a neuroscience point of view. You either have the left prefrontal cortex activated, which is the stress response, anxiousness, the sympathetic nervous system is activated. And as we know, when you're in that anxious state, you get the fight-flight response. You react. The other response is to hit the pause button and work with the parasympathetic system, which is to act with open-mindedness and curiosity. So you come off the stress response and you move to a much more bring it on. Whatever is going to happen, bring it on. We can work with this mindset. And this explains half the reason between why big change succeeds or fails is the quality of the leader's inner mind. It really, really is that fundamental. And I love this quote from, I don't know whether people have read, a remarkable little book, Dag Hammarskjöld. I probably haven't pronounced that right. He was the Secretary General of the United Nations back in the 50s. And he wrote a book called Markings, which are his little journals. Journaling is a very good way, by the way, of noticing what your inner mind and state is up to and working with that. But he had this expression, at every moment you choose yourself. So right here, right now, you can be in charge of your mind. How you're responding to me is in your hands, as opposed to, I wish Deborah would do something quite differently. Well, maybe I'll respond differently. It's all to do with my mind and how I choose to relate to what's going on. But it really is quite remarkable, the power of our minds. 94% of our brain's activity is unconscious. 94%. So we are just not aware of what our minds are up to. Good change leaders reduce that 94%. They know what is triggering them, what's going on in their mind, and can they adopt a resourceful response. It starts with being present. It sounds pretty basic, but so often our mind is in the past, in the future. Our mind is not giving attention to what's here now. And the only thing you can change is the now. And if you can change the now, then the future will be different. So leaders who really come off, distraction and consciously and intentionally bring their minds to the present moment. And when you do that, you can then choose your response to what happens. You come off default, you come off autopilot. I worked with a leader once who was running a big bank. It was the US business unit. And she was going through a major SEC inquiry for fraud, which was not a great place to be in. But every morning when she got up, she would have a shower. She'd go into the bathroom and the mirror steamed up a bit, with the humidity. And on the mirror, she drew, every day she did this, little like emojis, little faces she was just mapping her moods, her inner state as she got out the shower. She knew she had a big, difficult day ahead. And then she would choose which one of these emojis did she want to take into the day ahead. quite remarkable. But that's just a little story really that talks about how you are in charge of how you show up in life, no matter what the external situation. And once you are in charge of your response, you're more able to tune into what the system needs of you as a leader. Otherwise, you're just projecting your own story, your own fear, your own anxiety, your own needs, your own judgments onto the situation. So the capacity to tune into the system, what's going on here. So really going back to what I was talking about of healing at the system level, are you tuning into the price? Are you tuning into the need to have acknowledgement and respect of whatever happens? What are you really tuning into? And this was the number one inner state skill of a top leader in change, is the capacity to see beneath the surface and to tune into the deeper undercurrents of what need attention. So at every moment you do choose yourself. It has a direct line between succeeding in change and not succeeding in change. And I've done a lot of work with collective mindfulness. Can a system, can a nation become more mindful and present to what's going on? So it's not just at the individual level. This kind of brain work, this consciousness work can also operate at the collective level. I love this quote from T.S. Eliot: "At the still point of the turning world, there the dance is." So it doesn't matter what is happening or spinning around you, unless you can become still as a leader. In the heat of everything, you can't lead successful change. So I've had to do that in my own life. So there's me again when I was little. And the still point of my turning world, I decided to choose curiosity. I chose my response. I could either become a detached and, can't trust anybody, don't belong anywhere. But in fact, my story turned me into the most insanely curious child. That's my lovely dad behind me, who adopted me, Ron Rowland. And I did anthropology at university, studying human systems. So I'm really glad that this was my fate. And I was able to choose my response to what happened to me. So I hope, this is a quote from one of my favorite poets: "May I be the tiniest nail in the universe, in the house of the universe, tiny but useful." So I hope my address and the 3 messages might just be a tiny nail in the house of what you're doing right now. So they're the messages. And I now hand back, slightly late. I do apologize to Slava.
No apologies. Thank you very much. It was very insightful and interesting. Thank you also for sharing your personal feeling about this. We felt it. As a lot of ideas, actually. I'd like to start with a question from one of our participants. There are 3 of them, but I would concentrate on the last one. You mentioned this control. You studied from back more than 100 years ago, and all the business schools and what managers do actually. There's a control. It's everywhere, and therefore it's quite hard to give up and not to control or try to control everything. So it's related to the trust somehow, if we speak about organization and people. So the question is, what would you recommend to help increase or to build trust inside the organization? Because you work with different organizations in different countries with different, let's say, surrounding and culture. Are there any universal recipes?
For me, the biggest route to trust is transparency, being open. And I feel that when people are open and transparent, then I trust, where they're coming from. Now, of course, to get transparency, people have to feel secure and safe. Can I trust myself in this particular situation? But trust is such an important, and it starts with trusting yourself, doesn't it? One person said to me once, Slava, trust that nobody falls off the universe. so when everything's feeling out of control, there is that sort of trust or this self-belief. But for me, interrelational trust is all about transparency. It's all about also about credibility. Can I trust that they will do the job well? Do they have the right skills and the right experience? But yeah, and trust can be a long time to build, and it can be broken overnight. So it's an asset that is very, very precious and can be quickly lost. I don't know whether that's answered the question, if I understood the question.
No, everything's fine. We have one event in Reinforce UA just related to trust and to build into trust within the organization. What you mentioned is, when we speak about changing without trying to preserve control, which is a great idea, very powerful. And if it could be built on trust, then you need to trust people. You need to trust your people who works in the organization. But in this respect, what transparency means for the people to be open, or for you to be open, when to start with. And if you are going to be very open, when it immediately assumes that you don't want to hide anything inside you, which is quite difficult for certain people. So again, what to start with? With what? Just what's your experience within the organization? What you would advise to people who always, back from their MBA thesis, relied on control, etc. You mentioned the organization, which was, I assume it was RWE in energy sector, and it's German energy sector organization. It should be very hierarchical. What actually helped them to change this?
Yeah, I do apologize. Somebody's knocked at the door, which is why my dog is barking. And I don't want to leave this webinar to go and see who's at the door. Sorry, it's my new Dutch neighbours here in France who've just come to the door to introduce themselves, and they've just given me a big piece of Dutch cheese, and my dog has gone bonkers. I'm really sorry. So yes, in order to give up control, you have to trust the system, because often the tighter the control is usually a symptom of low trust. So in low trust cultures, you tend to get, bigger control systems. I don't know. It might sound a bit naive, but it might.
Okay. No, it's okay. Let's move further. Well, something like these internal rules, which you mentioned, like a system, self-organized, agile, adaptive systems, are these internal rules sometimes or habits inside organizations? Sometimes they call as a culture, organizational culture. And it's a known quote from Peter Drucker, who used to say that culture eats strategy on breakfast, which means it's quite a powerful thing. So as far as I could gather, your approach to change is first of all to affect and somehow influence the culture inside the organization. So to change all these rules which organization are based. So again, this is some kind of a very difficult choice between which kind of rules the leader should imply. You mentioned during your presentation, the flock of birds sometimes have no CEO. But they still know how to get to the point. Whether leaders should change rules, imply their own ideas about how rules should look like, or rely on those rules and how they evolve in the organization. What is the best, let's say, approach of this thing from this top, we need to change these rules and to apply that on that one, or to listen and to feel how people behave better and try to evolve from what exists?
Definitely the latter. Absolutely the latter. So I think when I was talking about that story with HIV and AIDS, so who determines the hard rules? They don't come from top down. They go out from leaders who are able to tune into the system, and they go out to look at where somewhere on the ground are people doing things differently that are leading to better outcomes. I used to work at Shell, and we did a big study of all the refineries around the world because there was a struggle. They weren't all in upper quartile performance. And we looked at the refineries that were doing really well and compared them, all other things being equal, age of the refinery, with a sample that weren't doing so well. And it was quite astonishing what little things were making the biggest difference to the outcomes. A lot of it was to do with the management style around the place. So in a sense, I would love everybody here on this call to think about becoming an anthropologist. So anthropologists go out to study systems, how they function, where they're healthy and flowing with ease, and where they're getting sticky and stuck. And whatever makes a difference, you form your hard rules based on where is there what I call this positive deviance. The company that went for growth, those hard rules were all determined in the market itself. And you then prototype them. So you come up with the hard rules and you try them out. So let's now take this hard rules to another part of the organization and see, how they work there. So you start, it's called viral change. You start to try and spread the code, the DNA of success, you spread that elsewhere. So in complex systems, if you look at like an ant colony or whatever, they all learn the code of the rules changes, not from the queen ants, but how the worker ants are doing things differently. They then quickly transmit new rules to their neighbors. It's quite fascinating when you look at the living world and how rules are generated and transmitted through an ecosystem. So that's what I try to apply in the human world, in organizations as well. And it does work. It can work, but leads to give up control.
Okay, the first step is not an easy one, to give up control. For many of those who also with us at the moment.
Let me give you another quick story of my advice is always to start small and do it differently. So I worked with a leader once, Slava, who had a meeting of his annual leadership gathering, 100 or so leaders. And until that time, every meeting had been pre-designed 6 months ahead. Every executive would show up and they knew at 10 o'clock this is going to happen, 11 o'clock, they're going to go into that breakout group. Here's the agenda. Everything was fixed. Big committee designing it for, a year ahead. He decided to experiment. So he stood up at the beginning of this meeting. There was no agenda. All these executives had no pre-read, no pre-work. You talk about working in the moment. And he stood up and he did his closing speech. And everybody thought he was bonkers, that he was, the communications people had given him the wrong speech. But he then stopped and said, right, that's my intention, where we're going to head. Let's now have a big coffee break. And I want 10 volunteers to come to the front now and design an agenda that will get us to that outcome. He worked completely in the here and now, working, talk about giving up control, total giving up of control. And that leadership meeting was the most creative, successful, energizing, co-created. And then they always wanted to have their meetings like that. Let's not control the agenda anymore. Let's work with the issues as they arise in the room. So my advice would be, don't suddenly rip up the rule book for the whole of your organization, but maybe start in meetings and how you run meetings.
Great example, thank you. Also, another very powerful thought during your presentation was about acknowledging the cost of change, which indeed is not very often mentioned, and indeed very important and powerful. I agree 100%. What appears actually, it stresses the leaders because they should take responsibility of this cost. It goes a little bit not in compliance with the just general advices, like, to show the benefits in the future, and also to stress that if we will not change, that something terrible will happen, coming back to 2.5 thousand years ago to Sun Tzu. That was the idea of strategy of change of the organization. But instead you advise, to accept the cost and to talk the cost and to try to live with this, which complicates the task of the managers. What are reasons other than being human? I understand the key reason is a moral and human, but other business reasons from those organizations, as you said. I mean, business by related to...
Really great question. The business reason for it, it's a really fantastic question, is that it tests the degree of commitment to whether people want to go with you on the journey.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, if the costs start popping out later, people say, oh, you never told us that. I'm now going to pull out my investment, or I'm not prepared to come on this journey with you. So I think the business rationale, it's not just about the human psyche. Once you've laid out the true, what I call the return on change, both the benefits, but also what's the price that's going to have to be paid. Are you prepared to come with me on that journey? Let's all sign up to that. Now, often you sign up to just the benefits plan, right? You don't sign up to the costs plan. Mm-hmm. And I've seen managers fail because of that. I've seen many, risk management processes go out the window because you haven't fully looked at all of the costs as well. So ignoring the human dynamics can lead to, breakdown, going back to loss of trust as well. So it's not just about settling the mind of people. It's also testing out the commitment of your partners. I don't know whether that's the most immediate business reason that comes to mind. Anyway,
great. I personally don't like in all situations business reasons, because I believe that humans should behave like humans in all situations. but this is an important, powerful insight. If starting the change and leading a change, you cannot do it alone. You need people who trust you. Actually, you need to build this trust to rely and to go ahead without full control of everything and trying to do the job. I have one question before we change to, in my opinion, the most important about building yourself and taking care of self-reflection. But before that, you worked with many organizations which went through changes. And mostly concentrate, and your book also concentrates on what is going on inside the organization. And statistics actually says that majority, 3/4 of all change projects fails, something like this, or even more. So from your experience and research, from those projects which failed, mm-hmm. how many was because of this inability or not enough organizational, let's say, wisdom and skills of leaders to run the change that resulted in failure, or there should be some others which failed because of external circumstances, which also could happen. We choose the wrong direction at all and started to change, and we were very excited about this. But then, some I will not repeat American famous phrase happens, and then all everything you tried to actually become useless because become void. So, but I don't know the statistics. You worked in this quite long, and I'd love to know your perceptions. Probably like a thumb turn. What?
Yeah.
What is
sometimes you've just made the wrong strategic bet. That's what you're saying. Sometimes change fails. The what has not been thought through. It's not the how. It's the what. You bet, like when Nokia bet on whatever their technology was, and or Sony versus Betamax. In the video world, you just made the wrong strategic choice. this is not backed up by any statistics at all, but of all the ones now in my 35 years of working in change, I've seen more change fail, not because of the lack of the strategic choice, but the execution of that choice.
Okay.
Generally, when you've got to the board level or whatever, you're a pretty competent, smart cookie. And so I might be biased because I do work in the field of the how. I'm not a McKinsey expert. I'm not a strategic what consultant. I work mainly in the how, but that's just my observation, is that we way underestimate attention to the how. So I would have said that the 75% that fail, I would have thought on balance, it's more because the how wasn't done well rather than the what was not the right what.
Thank you. Good observation. Let's say, and then come back, in my opinion, to the most difficult and most important, how leaders, people can build themselves to become leaders. What are these skills? And I know that you practice certain yoga and some others activities to help building this ability, capacity, power to lead others. And it would be great if you share your recommendations and the experience in this respect.
Yeah. Well, I think it does all go back to, because you can go on lots of leadership courses about strategic planning and marketing and all of that good stuff. But I've worked with many, if I'm looking at change leaders now, the change leaders I've worked with, what they've all really developed is the capacity to what I call observe their experience, not just be their experience. They have learned the capacity to detach themselves from their reactivity and to stand with distance, whether that's from making difficult decisions, whatever it might be. They know themselves, they know their triggers, they know their life story, they know what might catch them out. It's a tough gig being a top leader. And if you don't know yourself, and you haven't done work on yourself and learnt about that, then I don't think you can be a great leader of change, in my view. So it really is this notion of mastering, your inner game, and then you appear to others to be calm, resourceful, wise, inspiring, and the mirror neurons in our brain are infectious. So you hear my words right now, but you will respond to my inner presence more than what I'm saying. So I might be saying gobbledygook, blah, 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 but people might remember my presence in this hour. So unless leaders can work on their presence, I couldn't control my dog barking. How did I respond? Great live example that happened in the here and now. So, yeah. So in my view, it is this capacity to stand with distance and curiosity to your inner state. And I practice yoga to do that. When I do my yoga class, it's not about bending more. It's about noticing when I'm in a really difficult pose for a long time, where does my mind go? What's my self-judgment? What's going on in my mind? And how can I maybe, change that? So I see yoga as a bit of a metaphor for, good leadership development.
What would your advice is? Can people do it themselves? I mean, or they obviously need some coach or friend or whoever who help them moving through all this?
Oh, definitely work with a coach or an advisor. I've had probably on the handful, maybe 4 key people in my life who've really helped me see what it is to work systemically, to know myself in order to lead more effectively. So even though it's a self journey, it can't be done on your own. You have to do it in like a live practice with other people. So working with somebody, you don't have to go off and go to a Buddhist monastery and learn from monasteries and meditating, but working with people who can really help you see yourself honestly, rather than tell you what you want to hear.
What would you advise to change in business school curriculum?
Oh, I've worked in many. My main thing would be to change how it's taught, not what is taught. I find so many business school, the delivery is didactic, it's one way, it's traditional, people sit in rows, right, with the authority. Maybe it's changed, but a lot of business schools they don't live what they're teaching. Is that agile? Is that dynamic? So for me, I think I don't know, that would be my view is for business schools. I've written an HBR article on why leadership development doesn't develop leaders. And it's all about how I think the classic business school model could change to have more experiential, live, interactive, dynamic work rather than I must go and learn from the guru. It's a bit risky saying that in a format where people are here hoping to learn from a guru, but that would be my observation.
That's great. If you would give some kind of in your opinion, what is the closest or the best example of business school which implements or have this kind of approach to learning? What would you which would you mention?
Oh, I'm not going to name names.
No names. Okay. Okay, great. We have. It was very, very nice and interesting, a very insightful conversation, and thank you very much, Deborah, for your thoughts, for sharing your thoughts. Time is running in Ukraine as well as in London or in UK, and I have with a certain, let's say, not very nice feeling, but I have to close today's session and to thank you once again for the time you committed and invite you to Ukraine. Hopefully it could happen safely in a close and not long, not too long, for you to come.
Well, I would love to do that. And to everybody here, my message is I wish you just so much in your path towards peace and progress. So, from the bottom of my heart, I send all good wishes for that, and I would love to visit when.
Thank you. Well,
this is over.
Yeah, I enjoyed this discussion, and hopefully those participants who joined online or would plug in and somehow to view these records of this session would have a enjoyable, very insightful information. I'd like to remind only that our project is going on, and the next session bring this idea to the next section, all those participants, because the next session will happen on the 12th of April at 6 p.m. in 2 weeks, and our guest will be Kai-Han Krippendorf, and we'll speak about the strategy, about why and what, which appeared today not to be the most important issues in the change. And therefore, it will be very interesting to learn how to build a strategy and consider the competition currently with one of the experts who is the founder and CEO of Thinking and specialized in conducting research on business strategy, innovation, and technology. And we'll speak about excellency in a digital world, which is also creates a lot of stresses for all human leaders who would need to evaluate and somehow acknowledge the cost of moving towards this absolutely special and different worlds in the future. With this, thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Deborah, for sharing with us this idea, and we are looking forward for the next possibilities to meet. Goodbye.
The war in Ukraine has changed the world, and now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project Reinforce UA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on reinforceua.com.